In Romans 12:10, Paul gives us a weird instruction. Outdo one another in showing honor. But what does that mean? And how do we do that?
Our world fails to serve one another. But as followers of Christ, it is our call day in and day out. So let's talk about how we can serve better. Welcome to the Pilgrim Song. Welcome to the Pilgrim Song, episode 24. I'm Alexander.
And I'm Charlie.
And this is where your two favorite interracial friends talk about Jesus. Glad to be back with you guys again this week. We hope that you enjoyed the last two podcasts. Jubilee puts out a lot of very interesting videos, and maybe we'll react to another one coming here in the future. But we hope that you enjoyed. For next week, we have our 25th episode, which is like almost half a year. So that's pretty exciting, 25 of these things. So in honor of the 25th episode, we will be doing a Q&A. So when this is posted, either on YouTube or on our Instagram, you can go ahead and respond, send a comment, and ask a question about either of us, especially if you don't know us in real life and just get to know us. It can be spiritual, about the podcast, or just other normal things. So have fun with that. And also, next week on Wednesday, we will be releasing a blooper reel because we make a lot of mistakes and they're pretty funny to look at. So we'll be talking about that. But that is for next week. For this week, we want to talk about this topic of outdoing one another. And this was Charlie's idea to do this podcast. So what inspired this topic in particular?
Oh, I think you know what inspired this topic. This is actually one of my favorite verses in the Bible, and it's really kind of recently become one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Basically, it kind of goes hand in hand with our hospitality and that kind of what we talked about a little bit back with that. But I really like the request that Paul, or not a command, but like the charge that Paul gives the Romans when he tells them to outdo one another in showing honor, basically meaning like, if you see someone doing good to other people, being a good person, you try to one up them. You try to be better. You try to go even further than them and do even better. And then if everybody has that mentality, if everybody is trying to outdo the other person and showing honor and doing basically good things, then you're going to have a really beautiful relationship with the church and a really great church and a great community around your church.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And that's a huge test for us. Yeah. So we're already open to Romans 12. So before we get in here and read a little bit, do you think that humans are more naturally selfish or naturally giving from your perspective?
I just down at like the bare roots, I think humans are probably naturally selfish. Just because you see that in like kids, like children especially, and babies, right? The only thing that you care about when you come into this world is like your own basic needs, right? You need food, you need sleep, right? And you let that be very much known. And so I think just naturally, right, we want to take care of ourselves, right? We want to make sure that we're okay, and so we're gonna try to make sure that we're good. So we serve ourselves, I think, naturally. Which is why topics like this are important for us to talk about. So I don't know. What do you think?
I actually do think the same thing. Like I've seen a lot of the, after a kid gets told by their parents or their teacher, hey, you need to share. Then they're like, oh yeah, share. But that is not the baseline reaction. And especially in adults, you see that years of that attitude and that mentality is built up where everything is about what I get out of a situation, how I can use this for my own gain, like everything. So I unfortunately think that humans are naturally selfish, and that's why the call of a Christian to serve is so great, because you realize it's not about you. So I think that's really important. But yeah, so we have Romans chapter 12, which is where this idea comes from. Romans 12 opens with this call to be not like the world, to be not conformed to it, but transformed in renewing our minds towards Jesus and having discernment, wisdom that is given by God. He also talks about the grace that's been given. And, I've seen this example more and more in my life, because when I became a preacher, it's very easy for everyone to, like, in a way, look up to me, which I don't always like, but I'm in front and it's like I study and all this other stuff. So people know, like, what I do, but I've learned that my job is so much less important what happens, like, in front of people. It is more about the service. And there's plenty of people in the congregation who serve in many ways better than I do. So that's really important. So when he talks about the grace that you've been given, maybe your gift is not standing up in front and talking to people. Maybe it's just having people over and serving in those other ways. And that's perfectly reasonable. As a matter of fact, that's commended. So whatever you can to do to honor what God has given you, the gifts that God has given you, you're supposed to use them. And then you get into, chapter 12 is just, it's an interesting, like, crossing point, because you have this deep theology that comes in, and then chapter 12 is like the rubber hits the road. How is your life supposed to be changed by what you know about who God is? So then we have what is marked in my Bible as the marks of a true Christian in verse 9. So I'm just going to read up to our little verse here. So Romans chapter 12 and verse 9, it says, "Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor." So, when, like, it's a weirder passage. Like, the way that Paul writes usually is very long. He has a lot of what we would consider in modern American Western grammar run-on sentences. They're very long, but here they are very short snippets, and it reminds me of the Proverbs. This very short type of writing. He talks about love being genuine, and if you try to take the love out of Christianity, you don't have a Christianity. You have a husk of something that is a mockery of what it truly is. So loving people and loving your community, it's supposed to be genuine. We're supposed to abhor what is evil, which means we don't cling to the things of this world that would seek to separate us from God, but rather we hold on to what is good. We hold fast to that. He emphasizes again in verse 10, love one another with brotherly affection. Why do you think this differs from what he says genuine love is earlier in verse 9?
Yeah, so I think brotherly affection, brotherly affection is a little bit, I guess, different, I think, than he was talking about in verse 9. It's a different type of love is kind of my guess on that. I don't know if that's...
and that's what the genuine right. Is like, it's good, and you should show that to everyone. But when it comes to the brethren, that's going to be a familial, a different type of love. Yeah. As we like to say, phileo love, right? The Greek word. So, and then the concluding section that we have here in verse 10, outdo one another in showing love. Or showing honor, rather. So when we say
love to,
yes, that's true. But so outdo one another in showing honor. What does this mean to you specifically? Yeah, so when you read, outdo one another in showing honor, like the question is, what does he mean by showing honor? Mm-hmm. And basically the way that I've always been taught and the way that I kind of see it is basically outdo one another in just being a good brother to those people, like he was talking about before that, about loving each other. Like you said, outdoing one another and showing love. I think that kind of fits into this as well. Just in general, be a good brother to your brethren in your congregation, or be a good sister. Outdo one another in serving each other. When you show someone honor, that means that you're putting them in a high up place. You're putting them in a place that is above you. And so you show everybody else around you honor by lifting everyone else around you, and you serve them, and you be a good servant to them. You be a good brother, like I was saying. Okay. So that's how I look at it, and how everyone should be trying to do it. Good, yeah. And I really appreciate that idea. The more I'm thinking about how outdoing works, like it feels like competitive. The phrasing almost pulls this competitive thing out of us. And I think it should in some ways, because what I want to do is not, I want to puff myself up, but I really want to help those around me. And we've talked a little bit about why Sunday morning Christianity is a farce and why it's not helpful, it's not good, it's not Christianity. But this this passage reinforces that, because the love of the brethren is supposed to go far beyond what you do for 2 to 3 hours on a Sunday. It's supposed to go way beyond that. So, it just stop making it about, this is my religion. This is about a familial bond. This is supposed to be this close. So any claim that we have to say that, like, love before my life with Jesus, if it might have been an option, it's not an option anymore. It's our call to continuously outdo in showing each other honor. So, why do you think, in particular, as we close out our first section here, why do you think that this is a command from God?
Yeah, I think this is a command from God for several reasons, but I think the most important is just because this is what pushes us to be good people and to be a good, strong family with each other, I think. I like to think of it like it's almost like a never-ending loop, pretty much, to where, like, if I'm trying to outdo you in showing honor, you try to outdo the next person showing honor, they try to outdo, and then eventually it will come back around. It's kind of like, if you scratch someone's back and then, someone scratches yours, and it keeps going around. Eventually you form this circle that just keeps going. And so, you're pushing other people higher than you, but then other people are pushing you higher than them. So you get this kind of infinite cycle of just everybody lifting everybody up and being good. And that's what makes us a strong family, or should make us a strong family, which is just so important. I know we've talked about that a few times on this podcast. It's what gets that selfishness out of us. It turns us from a life of selfishness to a life of selflessness if we're actually trying to do that. Yeah. So
I heard someone's interesting interpretation of taking a peek into heaven and hell, what it's going to look like. Naturally, I don't think this is exactly what it's going to look at all, but it's in hell and heaven. There's both just a huge, tremendous feast, and in hell, everyone's got these 10-foot long chopsticks, but they're all starving. But in heaven, they're all full. And their bellies are full and everything's wonderful. And it's like, what is the difference? It's kind of a riddle thing. And the difference is, in hell, they're trying to feed themselves with these 10-foot long chopsticks. They can get anything to their mouth. But in heaven, they're all feeding each other. And I thought that was very interesting. This idea of, like, what comes with what Jesus has done for us already calls us, compels us, forces us to serve, especially without the idea of, what am I going to get back from this? Because the only thing that Jesus desired back from his sacrifice was us. And I think when we put that in context, when we really put that in practice, it's going to change the way we operate within our church culture and stuff like that. So, yeah. You have anything else about outdoing one another before we?
Yeah, I like that you brought out the slightly competitive aspect of it too. I've heard it in a lesson before. This isn't supposed to be competitive, but I'm also a very competitive person. And so, this kind of drives me to just want to genuinely, just do the best that I can for anybody. So you and I have a very good relationship.
We do.
And so you asked what kind of inspired this. I guess really I didn't mention this, but, really it's our relationship that you and I have had probably over the last, say, about a year now or so. And when you and I feel like I've really tried to embody this with our own relationship of just like this constant back and forth where, like, someone will do something for one person, and then the other one will try to one-up them with something else. And then, I'll get you something, and then you'll get me something, and then I'll buy you dinner, and then, you'll buy me, a car. Not really, but
no, not a car. But he really did out us like that. We do this. We are very competitive with this aspect, but it's helped me to see that, because I have a friend like Charlie who's like, hey man, you're homeless for a week and a half. Stay in my house. It's pretty crazy. So, but that's why we're thankful for the body of Christ. We have people like that.
So, and I think it goes beyond, just our own spiritual family within the church, right? It goes into our own homes as well. Yes. And this isn't the first time Paul has, told someone to show honor, right? When we look at just the home relationship, when he talks about husbands showing honor to their wives, right? This isn't the first time where he's used this specific terminology of showing honor. So, it's both in our spiritual family, but it's also in our own homes as well, where, you're showing honor, to your children, and the children are honoring the parents, and the husband's honoring the wife, and the wife's honoring the husband. And again, you just form this very, very close-knit group where everyone is just trying to serve everybody. which is exactly, how Jesus lived, as we'll talk about in the next section.
Yeah, and that's going to serve as a perfect segue. We do talk about Jesus here, so we're going to talk about why Jesus is pretty awesome and why he calls on us to serve and in what way he does that. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. As we begin the second segment, what we kind of want to do in this one is just break down different people in the Bible that we read about, that we really feel embody the idea of outdoing one another and showing honor, and people that we can model our lives after. And so to kind of start off, probably the most obvious one that comes to most people's minds when they think about, who probably was the best person at who outdid everyone in showing honor, and that would be Jesus. So we're going to be in John chapter 13. And in John chapter 13, I'll read beginning in verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God, was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his own outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered him, I am doing what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand. And Peter said to him, You shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered, If I do not wash you, you have no share with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, The one who bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. For he knew who was to betray him. That's why he said, Not all of you are clean. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen. But the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate bread has lifted his heel against me. I am telling you this now, before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me. Whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. So this is probably a pretty familiar story, for me and for a lot of people. This is Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. And so I don't know, when you read this story at first about Jesus, God bending down and washing people's feet, what do you think of?
Yeah. I always see it in the context of this is literally Jesus' last day. And like my perspective on how I would spend my last day, I would love to say I'm going to a soup kitchen, I'm going to give some homeless people some food, or I'm going to go hand out some Bibles. But in reality, what I want to do is like go fly to Aruba and ride an ATV and go see a lighthouse or something. That's what I would want to do. So when we see in context, like this is the last this is within Jesus' last couple of hours. This is his last opportunity to show the disciples what what it means to really follow him, and this is what he chooses to do. So that type of service, like it's gross. It's wiping the feet of a bunch of grimy people who have been walking through Jerusalem. Add into in the first century, this was slave work. So literally being a slave towards his disciples. It's a very interesting story.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a fantastic example for his disciples, but it's also a really, really good example for us today. So obviously, culturally, we don't do that. When I come over to someone's house, usually I don't have my feet washed by somebody else at the table.
It's coming back, though. People
Hey.
are doing at weddings. So.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
I actually didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. It's happening.
Gross. All right. Well, there you go. So, but either way, this would have been seen as like the lowest. Like you said, this is the lowest possible thing for a servant to do, is to wash the people's feet. So the fact that you have God, right? You have, the Lord of all, who's willing to bend down and wash the feet of the disciples, means so much for them, and means a lot for me too, because it shows me what I need to be willing to do, which is be willing to take those lowest possible things if it means to be able to serve my brother, to be willing to do anything that it takes to serve my brother, even if it's bending down and washing their feet if they need them, right? There is no task, there is nothing that is too beneath us that we should be unwilling to do, or that we shouldn't be willing to do. And so, always be a good servant, no matter what it is. If any brother that has a need, right, fill that need, if at all possible.
Yeah, and it requires a lot of humility too.
Right.
The fact that, like, again, it's slave work. It's getting on your hands and knees, and everyone wants to have the attention and the spotlight.
Yeah.
But the true work is done in the background. It's done by those who aren't seen. So you just have to go out there and do that hard work too.
So when I was, just as kind of an example, so like when Ann and I, my wife, were getting married, we were registering for gifts for like our wedding shower. There was something that we began to realize. We had both already been in college. We each had our own place that we were living at, and so we already had like a lot of like the big stuff that like you usually like to ask for, like pots and pans and crock pot, all those kinds of things. What we needed was like the little things, like towels or just gift cards for groceries. The simple small things that aren't as big. But what we realize is that nobody wants to get you those things. Everybody wants to get you the big flashy gift at a shower that's going to be, cool, and everyone's going to get all the attention's going to be on them, right? But what we really needed was the little things. And so we kind of tricked the system where we would register for stuff that we didn't actually need. So like we ended up getting like 4 coffee makers with the full knowledge that we would just take them back and exchange them for gift cards from like Walmart or Target. So at the end of the day, we ended up getting what we needed, but the way that we did that was kind of a little shady. But my point of that is that, everybody wants to do those big flashy deeds that kind of show off. We'll kind of talk about that in an example later, right? When we think about serving in the church, you think about the guys who go up in the front on Sundays, who lead singing or say the prayers, all that kind of stuff, or preach. And that's the kind of stuff, people actually see that. No one really thinks about the little things like the people in the back who make the Lord's Supper trays or the people who count the money at the end of the services. Those little tasks like that, the stuff behind the scenes that you don't see. People don't necessarily want to do that as much because, you want to kind of feel that pride and get that endorphin rush when you did something good. And people tell you that you did something good. But, although that is a need, although that is important to do, someone needs to do those roles, right? It's the little things that really need to get filled that are just as important as those big ones are. And so you need to be willing to do anything if it means serving other people.
And that's one way you can go ahead and serve somebody is like, outdo someone like the AV people, or if it's someone who makes the Lord's Supper bread, just go tell them thank you. Go write them a little card, make them muffins. I don't know, do something. That'd be nice. But yeah, that's a really interesting experiment.
Yeah, it's fun.
But yeah, and I think that there is this idea like I want to be seen. I want what I do to be noticed, and it is by God. So take that as what you want. One of the other aspects I think that plays a really cool dynamic in John 13 is the fact that it puts in there, John writes in there, Jesus knew Judas was about to betray him. And does Judas get excluded? Does Jesus spit on his feet and be like, yeah, that's what you get. You're an animal for trying to betray me, or any of that stuff? No, he serves him too. Yeah. And maybe even the apostles looking back on the situation, not just seeing Jesus washing their feet, but also washing Judas's feet, that had to be like the most impactful thing for them. Yeah. Like he was about to betray him. He was about to do all this other stuff. So, I mean, there's plenty of times in church culture, for me even, where I hear something wrong about somebody. So first of all, it's bad enough that we're gossiping. So I hear something bad and it's like, well, I'm not even going to do something nice for them. I was going to do something nice for them. Now I'm not going to, or any of that other type of attitude. And it's like, if Jesus took that attitude with us, if he took it with Judas, we wouldn't have been he wouldn't have died for us. So we have to put that stuff aside and seek to outdo, seek to encourage, seek to strengthen, because that's what Jesus did for us. And with him as the motivation and the example, we can't make any of these other excuses.
Yeah.
So you should follow Jesus. I highly recommend that.
Yeah. So the next example, unless you have anything else on Jesus.
No.
So your next example is probably another familiar one. And when you think of someone who was a strong servant in the Bible, this may be another one that comes to your mind. And that's Barnabas, or also Joseph would be his real name. And this is in Acts chapter 4. And in Acts chapter 4, beginning in verse 32, it says, "Now when the full number of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. And with great power the apostles were giving their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and was great grace upon them all. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as were owners of land or houses sold them, and brought the proceeds of what was sold, and laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as any had need. Thus Joseph, who was also called by the apostles Barnabas, which means son of encouragement, a Levite, a native of Cyprus, sold a field that belonged to him, and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet." So again, Barnabas is, someone for me that I definitely heard a lot about growing up. The name Barnabas, we can just start there. That the apostles give him literally means son of encouragement. I think they gave him that name for a very specific reason, and that was he was probably one of the most encouraging people to be around back in this time, who was willing to go as far as to literally sell his own possessions to give them to people who were in need, even if it meant that he would have nothing. That's something that we kind of saw the apostles do as well when they were with Jesus. In fact, they actually mentioned that before, like, Lord, we gave up our families and our homes and all these things to come and follow you. And Jesus responds with, anyone that gives those up is going to receive so much more than that in the end. But Barnabas really embodies, I think, the spirit of outdoing one another and showing honor because of what he's willing to do for other people. And even to the point where, we eventually see him team up with Paul on some of his first journeys that Paul goes on to preach the word to the rest of the world, and also to encourage Paul along his way. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on Barnabas?
Yeah, I really loved Barnabas as a character. I'm of the fringe group who believes that he wrote Hebrews. Join the squad. But Barnabas is one of those guys who is not, at least from what we see in Acts, he's not a huge preaching to 3,000 people, preaching these incredible philosophical but also biblical sermons or anything like that. That's usually Paul's perspective. But those little stories that we have of Barnabas, the examples that we have of Saul after he'd just been killing and imprisoning people, changed his name to Paul, all that stuff, and everyone is afraid of him, rightly. He probably tortured their friends and family, and Barnabas is like, no, God's done something with this guy. And the reason that Paul is brought in is because of Barnabas' example. One of the other big ones is what happens with John Mark, and he goes on the first missionary journey, and halfway through he leaves, and we aren't really given a reason, but it was probably not a good reason why he left. It probably wasn't illness or something like that. It just got scared, I don't know. So he leaves, and Barnabas and Paul have this fight over whether they should take him or not. And Barnabas insists, I'm going to take him. So that ends up with them splitting off, and overall that goes for the best. And later, Paul, when he's writing a letter, he talks about, this John Mark who he loves. And who knows what John Mark would have been without the influence of Barnabas. So we don't see everything that Barnabas does lit up by fireworks, but he was willing to just sacrifice what he had, sell off his land so that he was able to support the brethren. And I think that our drive should be, I want my name changed to something like this. The American example, or the whatever language or country you're from, the example of this is a person of encouragement. This is what they do to strengthen us. So
really people got names back then for what their reputation was. And so, although you may not get a name change today, but that's what you want. When people think of you, when people hear, your name, people hear Alexander, the first thing that they think of is, man, what a servant, or what an encouragement he is. And so, that's how, we should want to live our lives, to where, that's our general reputation. And not is it just, what we show on the outside, but it's actually how we truly feel on the inside. Barnabas very much actually loved everyone. And that goes into the passage we had in Romans 12, the beginning of verse 9. Let love be genuine. So if you're just doing it to fake it, well, God knows even if other people don't, and that's who we're trying to please ultimately. But I mean, just in this story though, we have the example of everyone was already doing this. So there's a lot of people selling land. So for Luke to point out Barnabas means that he was doing something above and beyond, maybe outdoing other people and showing honor. So that's, again, a very critical example. And I also thought it was interesting because as we go through Acts, he's never mentioned as Joseph again. It's always Barnabas. And so that's his reputation. That's who he is. I think it's really good. So the next example, another one in Acts, in Acts chapter 16, is Lydia. And beginning in verse 11 of Acts chapter 16, it says, "So setting sail from Troas, we made a direct voyage to Samothrace, and the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city some days, and on the Sabbath day we went outside to the gate to the riverside, where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who had come together. One who heard us was a woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, and a seller of purple goods, who was a worshiper of God, the Lord, opened her heart to pay attention to what was said by Paul. After she was baptized, her and her household as well, she urged us, saying, 'If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay.' And she prevailed upon us." It's just another, pretty commonly told story that I definitely heard about when I was a kid, and that is Lydia, the seller of purple. Probably the most unique thing about her. So purple's cool because if you don't know, back in this time, purple was a very special color. It was rare, and it typically it was a symbol of your status. So very high up people, royalty, would typically have the color purple. And so she sold this, and she was a very specialized fabric maker or dyer, I guess. I don't know what you call it. And so really cool fact about her. And I mean, she would have probably been pretty well known. And so obviously she was a follower of God, which is great. She's converted by Paul. Her and her whole household is baptized. And then the first act that we see her do as a Christian is to want to have Paul and Silas come and stay with her in her household, is willing to open up her home to them and just immediately begin a life of service. And so, again, what do you think of when you think of Lydia?
It shows the beginning is the impact of what Christ has done for us, and that calls us into this life of service. So once she goes down the water, comes back up, Paul is no longer just some dude who is preaching the gospel to her. That's her brother. And Silas is her brother, and maybe even Luke and Timothy are with them at this point too. So it's immediately what she wants to do is bring all these people into her house, and you don't want 4 people in your house. That can be a trip. That's and she already has her family living in there. But this is what she wants to do, and I love Andrew brought this up in a sermon recently. He prevailed upon us. She wanted this, and I think that Paul had shown her this showing of mercy, of this grace. She outdoes him, trying to bring him into the house. So I think it just shows a great example for us.
And I like the thing she prevailed upon. I think this is a good time to talk about the kind of flip side of this as well. part of being a really good servant is also the part where you allow other people to serve you too. So, I don't know what Paul's attitude toward Lydia was when she was trying to get them to stay in their house. Obviously, since it says the phrase, like, she prevailed upon us, that means she was probably pretty persistent about it. And so, maybe Paul had other plans. Maybe they wanted to stay somewhere else already in mind. But they were willing to kind of put that aside and accept her invitation to stay at their home. And so, if you want to outdo one another, if you're constantly trying to lift everyone else above you, you also have to be willing when someone else wants to do that to you too. You have to be willing to let them serve you. Otherwise, they're not going to be a good servant. And so I think letting others work for you is just as important as working for other people. So that's something that I struggle with. I don't like people to do nice things to me.
He does struggle with that.
I feel terrible when someone does. That's why, I don't like my birthday, because it's like people telling me happy birthday and giving me gifts. I'm like, no, I don't. It's like literally one of my least favorite things ever is to get gifts from people, because I just feel so bad that I did not get them something in return.
You just write a thank you.
No, but this is something that I really have to work on, is being, accepting of when other people want to do nice things for me, and just saying thank you and recognizing that. That doesn't mean that I have to go and one up them and be like, let me take you out to dinner, and then I show up with a bunch of presents. Like, here you go. Yeah.
And I think that just the best way we can do that is when someone does serve us, we should accept it, and we just be tell them that we're thankful for them and pray about it. Thank you, God, for putting this person in my life. I'm so thankful for the ways that they've served me. So there's plenty of ways for us to be working through that.
Yep.
So
did you have anything else on Lydia?
No, I don't.
So, there's obviously other examples that we have of people throughout the entire Bible that really kind of embody this idea of servitude. We have Abraham. Obviously, we talked about him. We did our kind of hospitality podcast. We have other people like Philemon, who's a very interesting character in the Bible. But just an interesting fact about him was that he allowed the church, likely at Colossae, to meet in his house. So he was willing to open up his home to allow the church to meet there. That's really, really cool. And just so many other people throughout the Bible that are really good. But we also have some other examples of people who maybe weren't so good throughout Scripture as well. Even though, maybe they had some good intentions, they were off by a few things. And so we're going to take a look at probably one of the most famous ones of those, which is in Acts chapter 5. And that is Ananias and Sapphira, kind of the anti-Barnabas, I guess, if you will. So in Acts chapter 5, and beginning in verse 1, it says, "But a man named Ananias, with his wife Sapphira, sold a piece of property. With his wife's knowledge, he kept back for himself some of the proceeds, and brought only a part of it and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, 'Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land? While it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not at your disposal? Why is it that you have contrived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to man, but to God.' When Ananias heard these words, he fell down and breathed his last. And a great fear came upon all who heard it. The young men rose and wrapped him up and carried him out and buried him. After an interval of about 3 hours, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. And Peter said to her, 'Tell me whatever you sold the land for so much.' And she said, 'Yes, for so much.' But Peter said to her, 'How is it that you have agreed to go together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door. They will carry you out.' Immediately she fell down at his feet and breathed her last. And when the young men came in, they found her dead. And they carried her out and buried her beside her husband. And a great fear came upon the whole church and upon all who heard these things." This is a very interesting story. And the older that I've gotten, the more that this story intrigues me and gets a little bit deeper and a bit more complicated, I think, than when you're a kid. When you're a kid, it's, just don't lie or
lied
whatever.
and died.
Lie and die. That's funny. But you have this couple who are willing to sell some of their land to give it It's fantastic, right? Starts off the exact same way that we know the story of Barnabas. But what they then decide to do is to keep some of the proceeds of the land for themselves, right? Is there anything wrong with that? No, not at all, right? That's perfectly fine, right? It's their land, it's their money, they can do with it what they want. The problem is when they decide to convey that this was all of the proceeds from their land and lie to the apostles about it when they gave them money. That was when the issue came in place. Mm-hmm. And so, what Peter says is, you're not lying to us, right? You're lying to God. And so God uses them as an example. And both of them, because Sapphira comes in later and does the same thing, are killed because of that. And so a very interesting legacy that's left for these two people, where you have Barnabas who sells his land, or Joseph who sells his land and becomes known as Barnabas, son of encourager. And then you have Ananias and Sapphira who sell their land and they're killed. And so, I don't know. What do you think of this story?
Yeah, I've had my, I guess, same as you. Like, I've had my perspective change on the story as I've gone along. I still, naturally, as we address the subject, as we're talking about like how we outdo one another in showing honor, I think they see the example of Barnabas. Mm-hmm. He's got a name change now. Like, this guy, he's got it. And I think that for whatever reason, they saw that clout as something they desired. They wanted to be known. So they used this as an opportunity to get that, but with only some of the money. And as you were mentioning, and as Peter says, like, if it was your own, like, when you had your own, you didn't have to lie about it. And like, if there were medical expenses, like, we don't know their entire life story. Yeah. Like, there could have been some other issues that they needed with the money, or just, whatever reason. But they use this excuse and they lie about it, and that's what brings them into the situation. The one place I kind of struggle with it is like, are they saved or are they not? And it's like, because like,
their last deed was a lie.
Their last deed was a lie, and it's like, but that's still, there's also, if I got struck down for doing one wrong thing, then then I think in some ways that kind of takes away from the grace of God. If we just say, oh, these people, boom, automatically done. Where they weren't clearly not genuine because they messed up one time. So
they obviously were followers of God, and they obviously wanted to do something that was right in this. So they just put a twist on it that wasn't so right.
Yeah, and then verse 11 kind of tells us, at least for me, is the church realizes that this is something we have to take seriously. So I think that God punishes them rightly, right? But it has this influence on the church, but it also doesn't cause them to lose their salvation. Yep. And that's kind of where I sit now. But like, originally when I was a kid, it's like, yeah, they're in hell. So that's not the same anymore.
I don't like the chapter break of 4 and 5 there, because literally when we read about Barnabas, it was literally the verse before. It's like the story of Barnabas ends in 4 verse 37, then it literally 5:1 starts off, but a man named Ananias. Like, it's told that's it really should be read as one unit, where you have Barnabas who becomes a son of encouragement, but then there's also this couple named Ananias and Sapphira that do this. So you have one person that does this, you have another couple that does this. Both are an example for the church. Who do you want to be like? Do you want to be the people trying to do it for the show and be flashy about it, do the big things, or do you want to be, the Barnabas who literally has his name changed because of his own reputation? Yeah. And so that's up to you.
I think that plays a really huge, important role in how we read scripture sometimes. It's just those little numbers, they make us turn our brains off for a second. No, this is completely unrelated. So ignore them sometimes, most of the time.
Yeah, so that's all I had on this particular section of examples. Did you have anybody else?
Yeah, no. Anything else? There's plenty in there, both negative and good, but our call to outdo one another, it's exemplified in these characters, especially in Jesus. So, all right. Yeah.
So when we come back, we're going to answer the question of, well, what does this look like for us today? Now that we've looked at some examples in the Bible, how are we going to do that today in our culture of modern day? So we'll see y'all in a second.
One of the things that you won't learn from the Q&A, because you'll know it now, is that Charlie and I love The Office. In one of the episodes of The Office, we have Dwight and Andy. In particular, Dwight brings in some bagels for the group because he's trying to get Jim fired. Andy responds to this. He keeps talking about how, I'm from a family that's proper, and what we do is we respond with RSVPs. When you send us an invite to things, we go, basically we go hard. We everything that he does, he would do, we're going to respond to it better. And throughout the episode, they go back and forth, handing out things, giving things to each other. But it's with this motive. Dwight is trying to get a co-worker fired, and Andy is just, this is just my upbringing. This is just what I'm supposed to do. Now, when our call to outdo one another, again, is centered upon the verse that comes before it in Romans 12:9, that love is supposed to be genuine. And then in verse 10, that we're supposed to have true brotherly affection. That means familial love for each other. So while Dwight and Andy are given a funny example of let's outdo one another, when it comes to truly outdoing one another in the Christian household and the faith that we have together, it's going to play out a lot differently. So we're just going to talk a little bit about some examples that we think about how outdoing one another and showing honor, how that's looked. For me personally, I want to give an example of what's happened here recently for me at Northwood. And that is, Charlie's had me over when I was moving out of my house, and my lease got pushed back, so I had more time to be homeless, and he and his wife invited me over. So I'm very thankful for them for doing that, but also just people helping me out with this move. And also, since I've been at Northwood, I have a car that's from 2001, and I love my car. I love Leo a lot, but Leo does have his problems. He has his car troubles, and I have saved probably thousands of dollars because one of the members here is good at he's good at working on cars and stuff like that, and he is willing to literally just help me with it. So I'm paying no labor costs. Like, I just go buy one little part and he just puts it together, and he has been a literal lifesaver. He's helped me out and served me in a lot of ways. So I doubt you're listening, Chummy, but you're a real one. So I think that he really exemplifies this idea of, I'm going to outdo and he says it, a lot of it's my service to the congregation. It's like, the way that he serves, I think, is way more impactful than the way that I do from the pulpit. So that's one of my big examples. I've really come to appreciate the Clan family altogether, and it's been really impactful for me to see that example. Do you have an example that you could think of?
So like you said, there's obviously our relationship where every time that I try to do something nice for you, it seems like within just a few days you answer that with something very nice to me. And so, I've obviously really appreciated all the stuff that you've done for me over the last year and everything that you've helped me out with and been willing to give to me and to my wife. There's only one of you, but there's two of me with me and Anna. So you have to do twice the work.
I'm getting reinforcements. Don't worry.
And so I really do appreciate all of that. There are so many members at Northwood that I could look at that have helped me out in so many ways. That have been an encouragement to me in a lot of different times with a lot of different things. Specific examples, I remember the first time I heard a lesson that was really given on Barnabas by one of the preachers at Northwood, and how, his point was that each and every one of us, we need to be a Barnabas to somebody. We need to find somebody to be an encouragement to. And so I took it upon myself that for the next year, every single day for an entire year, I was going to text him a motivational quote. Something simple to start off every day, whether that was like a Bible verse or just some inspirational quote that I found on Google or on a motivational quote app that I had on my phone. I was going to do that for a year, and so I did. And, there were a couple of days that I missed in the year, but then I'd double up the next day to make up for it. So, trying to do things like that. Everything that you've done for me. I've had plenty of friends here come through at Northwood in my time here in college that have opened up their homes to me and have helped me work on things and helped me do stuff. But I guess my mentality kind of is like anything that I have the ability to do, I want to do that to help others, because it's my way of being able to give back some of the things that God has blessed me with in my life. And so,
and looking at your wording that you use there of within my ability, I think that's important to do. Like if you're going broke, like you're going into debt trying to serve people, it's like you need to, handling your finances is important too. Like you need to get a hold of that. It's important that when we do serve, and it's not all about money. Again, I think we've had this discussion. Time is so important. If you give time, that's going to be way more effective in a lot of different ways. If like we've given the example, like we've been able to go to a soup kitchen a couple of times and stuff like that, and there's always the opportunity. I can pitch in a couple of dollars so that we can get spaghetti for the people. But you being there and actually being able to serve with us is more edifying and more helpful and more encouraging. So don't feel like you have to have a huge house to be hospitable, and don't feel like you have to have a ton of money to outdo other people in showing honor, because that's not what it's about. Jesus didn't have a lot of money either, and he still found ways to serve.
So there's obviously, there's a lot of stuff that can be done. And maybe that's a bit overwhelming, or maybe you're sitting there and you're saying, I just don't know where to begin, right? I don't even know if there's any need. It seems like where I am, every need is met. Or maybe you're just a kid, or maybe you're, a college student and you think that you're exempt from this or something like that. Where do you think would be a good starting point for someone who wants to, begin to show honor towards other people?
I would say start looking on the fringes of your congregation, because I guess it's kind of unfortunate human nature, but we kind of have people who shift to what we call a core, and then people that are on the outside of the core. So there are some people who maybe they come in late frequently, or they're sitting in the back, or they sit other places. They're out of there as soon as possible, all that type of stuff. You can start with them. You can start with befriending them, because maybe part of the reasons that people leave so quickly is because they really don't feel welcome. And we lack making them feel welcome. Other people have excuses for that, so I'm not going to totally put it on us, but we should be making the effort. So find somebody who's on the fringe of your congregation and just invite them out to eat for giving them an opportunity, or just sit next to them in church. Just be nice to them. And some of my favorite experiences are just sitting next to and singing with people that I have never sung with before. So I like that. And I think that's just a good place to start, because the people who are in what we call the core, those are the people we already deem as strong. And it's like, how can I help them? And it's like, well, if you know that someone else is struggling or just not there very often, then you see what you can do to help them. So,
I think that's good. I think another one would be, in your home congregation, if you hear that there's a need for Bible class teachers. Maybe like in the young kids class I know here, that's been kind of pretty much feels like every Sunday it gets announced, hey, we need teachers for the young people's classes. Like, we need someone to do that. And, the fact that it's getting mentioned every Sunday means that it's not being fulfilled by anybody. And so, teaching is something, right? It's not, it should be something that each of us, is striving to be able to do, is to be able to, take what we've learned about Jesus and be able to take it to other people. You can do that in different ways. It doesn't have to just be in a formal classroom setting. It can just be by the way you live your life as an example, and just small conversations that you have with people every day. But if you're comfortable in that setting, or maybe you're willing to learn how to do that, to be comfortable in that setting, put your name in the hat to be able to teach a class. That was one of the first things my freshman year at UA. I got the opportunity to be able to teach the middle school class. All of those middle schoolers are now in college, which makes me feel very old. But, kind of starting there, I really I loved to teach. I formed a really tight bond with a lot of those kids that has now continued all the way through their high school and now on into them being in college. That's a good opportunity. Like, that's not one that I had to ask for. I was lucky in that they asked, I was approached. But you may not be approached. And so, just, go talk to your elders, I think would be another good thing that you could do. Hopefully, if you're a member of a congregation that has elders, you should have a close enough relationship with them to where you would be willing to go and talk to them and ask them, because they probably know more about needs than, or at least they should, know more about the needs of the congregation than you do. And so that's another good thing too. Another one would be, if you feel like you have the ability to, lead prayer or, read a scripture, which I feel like, most anyone could probably be able to do or should be able to do, taking active part in worship service, to be able to do that could be a good place for you to start getting into that. I feel like there's a lot of opportunities, but, you have to be the one to kind of take that first step.
Yeah. And I think just going along with what teaching gives, like it takes time for sure. And if you're working with kids, they can be very frustrating. I mean, working with adults can be frustrating too, So it takes your time because you have to cut out time to study your scripture in order for you to make sure you're not going to mess it up in front of people. Yeah. It's going to take time to get to the congregation early. If you got to get a PowerPoint, all that stuff you have to get ready. But I assure you that one, it's rewarding because if you're seeking to glorify God and he's the one who sees it. Yeah. But number two, when you see something click for somebody, it is the coolest thing. Yeah. Being able to see like some of the things that I'm teaching click for these little kids, it's the coolest thing. And as frustrating as they can be sometimes, it's also just, they've been a blessing for my life as well, where I do see the example of Jesus calling on children how we're supposed to be more like them, and I've seen that as well. Yeah. So as Charlie mentioned, there's plenty of ways to serve in public worship. There's plenty of ways to serve in the background. Yeah. If there's something that you have the ability to do, you think that you have a gift, you have a talent, use it for something. Yeah. We have an upcoming gospel meeting fall focus thing. If you have a talent with art, you can make the poster for something like that. There's plenty of ways for you to get involved in helping, whether it be social media, whether it be just out and about, inviting people, whatever it is. You have a gift, you have a grace that's given, as we see in Romans 12. Use it for the glorifying of God. Use it to outdo the honor shown.
And then be willing to thank the people that you see that do a lot of the things that you maybe see and maybe don't see. Like here at Northwood, we have a family that cleans the building every week, right? Just be willing to go to them and just thank them for allowing us to have a nice, clean building that we can all come in. There's someone that mows the grass. There's people that take the garbage out after each service. All those people, that's a very important thing because, no one wants to be sitting in a dust-filled room or trash bags all around you and it smells terrible or something like that. No, but there's someone that's doing that. If there's not, maybe that's something you could do. But be willing to thank those people for what they do and show your appreciation to them. Because in doing so, you're showing them honor as well. You're saying, hey, I'm going to lift you up even though, you just cleaned the building. I'm going to show you honor by showing my appreciation for what you've done for us. So,
and I think that this also helps when you get a you should be serving your congregation now, doing them all together. But I think also when you have a close-knit group as well, when you have closer friends, and that's going to be a place where it pushes you. And Charlie and I have talked about our relationship a bit with this, and we have other younger friends who do the same thing, where it's a constant pushing to be better. Because not only is it how do you understand this passage, but it's also, how can I learn to serve you better? Yeah. And that we need that push because oftentimes we're driven towards stagnation. Yeah. So find people who are going to push you and push you to grow.
When you're in sports, one of the things we were just talking about, in sports, or you learn to play an instrument or whatever, one of the best ways to get better at something is to play with people who are better than you. You're going to learn from them. So there may be somebody that that they feel like you feel like they do everything, right? They do every role. They're always taking part in services, right? They're doing all these kinds of things in the background. They're very prominent, surround yourself by people like them, go and spend time with them and learn from them. And it's going to push you to want to be better and be more like them as well.
So we've been given this community by Jesus. We need to be serving it and we need to be using it to grow. So that's pretty much what we want to wrap up out of Romans 12. You got anything else before I don't go, Charlie? All right. Thank you guys for listening to this episode. It was one of my favorites, honestly, to record. I think that there's a lot of cool stuff and a lot of things that we both need to be growing in, and hopefully some way you can grow as well.
Don't forget about next week's episode. We definitely need
questions.
We have to write the script based on what you ask us, or what we ask each other. So
it's going to be really short if you don't submit a question.
There you go.
So,
excellent point.
Which maybe you want that.
10-minute episode. All right. So, but thank you guys again for listening. We really appreciate it. With this episode releasing, we will be at 400 listeners all time. So that's wonderful. And thank you guys again so much. We hope that you have a blessed week, and we will see you next week.